2. 6 ways to make people like you. First, do this and you'll be welcome anywhere. Why read this book to find out how to win friends? Why not study the technique of greatest winner of friends the world has ever known? Who is he? You may meet him tomorrow coming down the street. When you get within 10 feet of him, he will begin to wag his tail. If you stop and pat him, he will almost jump out of his skin to show you how much he likes you. And you know that behind this show of affection on his part, there are no ulterior motives. He doesn't want to sell you any real estate, and he doesn't want to marry you. Did you ever stop to think that a dog is the only animal that doesn't have to work for a living? A hen has to lay eggs, a cow has to give milk, and a canary has to sing. But a dog makes his living by giving you nothing but love. When I was 5 years old, my father bought a little yellow-haired pup for 50 cents. He was the light and joy of my childhood. Every afternoon about 4:30, he would sit in front of the front yard with his big, beautiful eyes staring steadfastly at the path. And as soon as he heard my voice or saw me swinging my dinner pail through the buckbrush, he was off like a shot, racing breathlessly up the hill to greet me with leaps of joy and barks of sheer ecstasy. Tippy was my constant companion for 5 years. Then one tragic night, I shall never forget it, he was killed within 10 feet of my head, killed by lightning. Tippy's death was the tragedy of my boyhood. You never read a book on psychology, Tippy. You didn't need to. You knew by some divine instinct that you can make more friends in 2 months by becoming genuinely interested in other people than you can in 2 years by trying to get other people interested in you. Let me repeat that. You can make more friends in 2 months by becoming interested in other people than you can in 2 years by trying to get other people interested in you. Yet I know, and you know people who blunder through life trying to wig-wag other people into becoming interested in them. Of course, it doesn't work. People are not interested in you. They are not interested in me. They are interested in themselves, morning, noon, and after dinner. The New York Telephone Company made a detailed study of telephone conversations to find out which word is the most frequently used. You have suggested it. You have guessed it. It is the personal pronoun I. It was used 3,900 times in 500 telephone conversations. I. When you see a group photograph that you are in, whose picture do you look for first? If we merely try to impress people and get people interested in us, we will never have many true, sincere friends. Friends, real friends, are not made that way. If we merely try to impress people and get people interested in us, we will never have any true, sincere friends. Friends, real friends, are not made that way. Napoleon tried it, and in his last meeting with Josephine, he said, "Josephine, I have been as fortunate as any man ever was on this earth. And yet, at this hour, you are the only person in the world on whom I can rely." And historians doubt whether he could rely even on her. Alfred Adler, the famous Viennese psychologist, wrote a book entitled What Life Should Mean to You. In that book, he says, "It is the individual who is not interested in his fellow man who has the greatest difficulties in life and provides the greatest injury to others. It is from among such individuals that all human failures spring." You may read scores of eroded tomes on psychology without coming across a statement more significant for you and for me. Adler's statement is so rich with meaning that I'm going to repeat it in italics. It is the individual who is not interested in his fellow man, who has the greatest difficulties in life and provides the greatest injuries to others. It is from among such individuals that all human failures spring. I once took a course in short story writing at New York University, and during that course, the editor of the leading magazine talked to our class. He said he could pick up any one of the dozens of stories that drifted across his desk every day, and after reading a few paragraphs, he could feel whether or not the author liked people. If the author doesn't like people, he said, people won't like his or her stories. This hard-boiled editor stopped twice in the course of his talk on fiction writing and apologized for preaching a sermon. I'm telling you, he said, the same things your preacher would tell you, but remember, you have to be interested in people if you want to be a successful writer of stories. If that is true of writing fiction, you can be sure it is true of dealing with people face to face. I spent an evening in the dressing room of Howard Thurston, telling you the same thing of a preacher will tell you, but remember, you have to be interested in people if you want to be a successful writer of stories. If that is true of writing, you can be sure it is true of dealing with people face to face. I spent an evening in the dressing room of Howard the last time he appeared on Broadway. Thurston was the acknowledged dean of magicians. For 40 years he had traveled all over the world, time and again, creating illusions, mystifying audiences, and making people gasp with astonishment. More than 60 million people had paid admission to his show, and he had made almost $2 million in profit. I asked Mr. Thurston to tell me the secret of his success. His schooling certainly had nothing to do with it, for he ran away from home as a small boy, became a hobo, rode in boxcars, slept in the haystacks, bagged his food from door to door, and learned to read by looking out of boxcars at signs along the railway. Did he have a superior knowledge of magic? No. He told me hundreds of books had been written about legerdemain. Legerdemain, and scores of people knew as much about it as he did, but he had two things that the other didn't have. First, he had the ability to put his personality across the footlights. He was a master showman. He knew human nature. Everything he did, every gesture, every intonation of his voice, every lifting of an eyebrow had been carefully rehearsed in advance, and his reactions were timed to split seconds. But in addition to that, Thurston had a genuine interest in people. He told me that many magicians would look at the audience and say to themselves, well, there is a bunch of suckers out there, a bunch of hicks. I'll fool them all right. But Thurston's method was totally different. He told me that every time he was on stage, he said to himself, I'm grateful because these people come to see me. They make it possible for me to make my living in a very agreeable way. I'm going to give them the very best I possibly can. I declared he never stopped in front of the footlights without first saying to himself over and over, I love my audience. Ridiculous? Absurd? You're privileged to think anything you like. I'm merely passing it on to you without comment as a recipe used by one of the most famous magicians of all time. First, he had the ability to put his personality across the footlight. Well, there is a bunch of suckers there, but I am grateful because they are people. I am grateful because come to see me. They make it possible for me to make my living in a very agreeable way, and I am going to give them the very best I possibly could. Had a genuine interest in people. He declared he never stopped in front of the footlight. Absurd, you're privileged to think anything you like. I'm merely passing it on to you without comment as a recipe used by one of the most famous magicians of all time. George Dyke of North Warren, Pennsylvania, was forced to retire from his service station business after 30 years when a night highway was constructed over the site of his station. It wasn't long before the idle of days of retirement began to bore him, so he started filling his time trying to play music on his old fiddle. Soon he was traveling the area to listen to music and talk with many of the accomplished fiddlers. In his humble and friendly way, he became generally interested in learning the background and interest of every musician he met. Although he was not a great fiddler himself, he made many friends in the pursuit. He attended competitions and soon became known to the country music fans in the eastern part of the United States as Uncle George, the fiddle scraper from Kansas country. When we heard Uncle George, he was 72 and enjoying every minute of his life. By having a sustained interest in other people, he created a new life for himself at a time when most people consider their productive years over. That, too, was one of the secrets of Theodore's astonishing popularity. Even his servants loved him. His valet wrote a book about him entitled Theodore, Hero to His Valet. In that book, Amos relates this illuminating incident. My wife one time asked the president about a Bob White. She had never seen one, and he described it to her fully. Sometime later, the telephone at our cottage rang. Amos and his wife lived in a little cottage on the Roosevelt estate at Oyster Bay. My wife answered, and it was Mr. Roosevelt himself. He had called her, and he said to tell her that there was a Bob White outside her window, and that if she would look out, she might see it. Little things like that were so characteristic of him. Whenever he went by our cottage, even though we were out of sight, we would hear him call out, "Oh, Annie? Oh, James." It was just a friendly greeting as he went by. How would employees keep from liking a man like that? How could anyone keep from liking him? Roosevelt called at the White House one day when the president and Mrs. Taft were away. His honest liking for humble people was shown by the fact that he greeted all the old White House servants by name, even the scullery maids. When he saw Alice, the kitchen maid, writes Archie Butt, he asked her if she still made cornbread. Alice told him that she sometimes made it for the servants, but no one ate it upstairs. They show bad taste. Roosevelt boomed, and I'll tell the president so when I see him. Alice brought a piece to him on the plate, and he went over to the office, eating it as he went and greeting gardeners and laborers as he passed. He addressed each person just as he had addressed them in the past. Hoover, who had been head usher at the White House for 40 years, said, with tears in his eyes, "It is the only happy day we had in nearly 2 years, and not one of us would exchange it for a $100 bill." The same concern of the seemingly unimportant people helped sales representative Edward M. Sykes, Jr. of Chatham, New Jersey, retain an account. Many years ago, he reported, I called on customers for Johnson & Johnson in the area. One account was a drugstore in Hingham. Whenever I went into this store, I would always talk to the soda clerk and sales clerk for a few minutes before talking to the owner to obtain his order. One day I went up to the owner of the store and he told me to leave as he was not interested in buying J&J products anymore because he felt they were concentrating their activities on food and discount stores to the detriment of the small drugstore. I left with my tail between my legs and drove around the town for several hours. Finally, I decided to go back and try at least to explain our position to the owner of the store. When I returned, I walked in and, as usual, said hello to the soda clerk and sales clerk. When I walked up to the owner, he smiled at me and welcomed me back. He then gave me double the usual order. I looked at him with surprise and asked him what had happened since my visit only a few hours earlier. He pointed to the young man at the soda fountain and said that after I had left, the boy had come over and said I was one of the few salespeople that called the store that even bothered to say hello to him and to the others in the store. He told the owner that if any salesperson deserved his business, it was I. The owner agreed and remained a loyal customer. I never forgot that to be genuinely interested in other people is the most important quality for a salesperson to possess, for any person for that matter. Get that. To be genuinely interested in other people is the most important quality for a salesperson to possess, for any person for that matter. I have discovered from personal experience that one can win the attention and time and cooperation of even the most sought after people by becoming genuinely interested in them. Let me illustrate. One can win the attention and time and cooperation of even the most sought after people by becoming genuinely interested in them. Years ago, I conducted a course in fiction writing at the Brooklyn Institute of Arts and Sciences, and we wanted such distinguished and busy authors as Kathleen Norris, Fannie Hurst, Ida Albert, Rupert to come to Brooklyn and give us the benefit of their experiences. So we wrote them, saying we admired their work and were deeply interested in getting their advice and learning the secrets of their success. Each of these letters was signed by about 150 students, and we said we'd realized that these authors were too busy to prepare a lecture, so we enclosed a list of questions for them to answer about themselves and their methods of work. They liked that. Who wouldn't like it? So they left their homes and traveled to Brooklyn to give us a helping hand. By using the same method, I persuaded Leslie M. Shaw, Secretary of the Treasury Theodore Roosevelt Cabinet, George Wickersham, Attorney General in Taft's Cabinet, William Jennings Bryan, Franklin D. Roosevelt, and many other prominent men to come to talk to the students of my courses in public speaking. All of us, be we workers in the factory, clerks in an office, or even a king upon his throne, all of us like people who admire us. Take the German Kaiser, for example. At the close of World War I, he was probably the most savagely and universally despised man on the earth. Even his own nation turned against him when he fled over the whole land to save his neck. The hatred against him was so intense that millions of people would have loved to tear him limb from limb or burn him at the stake. In the midst of all this forest fire of fury, one little boy wrote the Kaiser a simple, sincere letter glowing with kindliness and admiration. This little boy said that no matter what the others thought, he would always love William as his emperor. The Kaiser was deeply touched by his letter and invited the little boy to come to see him. The boy came, so did his mother, and the Kaiser married her. That little boy didn't need to read a book on his how to win friends and influence people. He knew how instinctively. All of us, be we workers, again, all of us like people who admire us. If we want to make friends, let's put ourselves out to the things of other people, out to do things for other people, things that require time, energy, useful, unselfishness, and thoughtfulness. When the Duke of Windsor was Prince of Wales, he was scheduled to tour South America, and before he started out on that tour, he spent months studying Spanish so that he could make public talks on the language of the country, and the South Americans loved him for it. If we want to make friends, let's put ourselves out to do things for other people, things that require time, energy, unselfishness, and thoughtfulness. For years, I made it a point to find out the birthdays of my friends. How? Although I haven't the foggiest bit of faith in astrology, I began by asking the other party whether he believed the date of one's birth has anything to do with character and disposition. I then asked him or her to tell me the month and day of birth. If he or she said November 24th, for example, I kept repeating to myself, November 24th. The minute my friend's back was turned, I wrote down the name and birthday and later would transfer it to a birthday book. At the beginning of each year, I had these birthday dates scheduled in my calendar pad so that they came to my attention automatically. When the natal day arrived, there was my letter or telegram. What a hit it made! I was frequently the only person on earth who remembered. If we want to make friends, let's greet people with animation and enthusiasm. When somebody calls you on the telephone, use the same psychology. Say hello in tones that bespeak how pleased you are to have the person call. Many companies train their telephone operators to greet all callers in a tone of voice that radiates interest and enthusiasm. The caller feels the company is concerned about them, and let's remember that when we answer the telephone tomorrow. If we want to make friends, let's greet people with animation and enthusiasm. Use the same psychology. The caller feels the company's concern about them, and let's remember that we answer the phone tomorrow. Tone of voice radiates interest. Tone of voice that radiates interest and enthusiasm. Showing a genuine interest in others not only wins friends for you, but may develop in its customers a loyalty to your company. In an issue of the publication of the National Bank of North America on New York, the following letter from Madeline Rosedale, a depositor, was published, showing a genuine interest in other customers' loyalty for you. I would like you to know how much I appreciate your staff. Everyone is so courteous, polite, and helpful. What a pleasure it is, after waiting for a long line, to have the teller greet you pleasantly. Last year, my mother was hospitalized for 5 months. Frequently, I went to Mary Petrusilo, a teller. She was concerned about my mother and inquired about her progress. Is there any doubt that Mrs. Rosedale will continue to use this bank? Charles, one of the large banks in New York City, was assigned to prepare a confidential report on a certain corporation. He knew of only one person who possessed the facts that he needed so urgently. As Mr. Walters was ushered into the president's office, a young woman stuck her head through a door and told the president that she didn't have any stamps for him that day. I am collecting stamps for my 12-year-old son, the president explained to Mr. Walters. Mr. Walters stated his mission and began asking questions. The president was vague, general, nebulous. He didn't want to talk, and apparently nothing could persuade him to talk. The interview was brief and barren. Frankly, I didn't know what to do, Mr. Walters said as he related the story to the class. Then I remembered what his secretary had said to him, Stamp's 12-year-old son, and I also recalled that the foreign department of our bank collected stamps taken from letters pouring in from every continent washed by the 7 seas. The next afternoon I called on this man and sent in word that I had some stamps for his boy. Was I assured in with enthusiasm? Yes, sir. He couldn't have shaken my hands with more enthusiasm if he had been running for Congress. He radiated smiles and goodwill. My George will love this one, he kept saying as he fondled the stamps. And look at this is a treasure. We spent half an hour talking stamps and looking at a picture of his boy, and he then devoted more than an hour of his time to giving me every bit of information I wanted. Without my even suggesting that he do it, he told me that all he knew, and then called in his subordinates and questioned them. He telephoned some of his associates. He loaded me down with facts, figures, reports, and correspondence. In the parlance of newspaper reporters, I had a scoop. Here is another illustration. C.M. DeFeo Jr. of Philadelphia had tried for years to sell fuel to a large chain store organization, but the chain store company continued to purchase its fuel from an out-of-town dealer and haul it right past the door of Nafale's office. Mr. Nafale made a speech one night before one of my classes, pouring out his hot wrath upon chain stores, branding them as a curse to the nation, and still he wondered why he couldn't sell them. I suggested that he try different tactics. To put it briefly, this is what happened. We staged a debate between members of the course on whether the spread of the chain store is doing the country more harm than good. Nafale, at my suggestion, took the negative side. He agreed to defend the chain stores and then went straight to an executive of the chain store organization that he desired and said, I'm not here to try to sell fuel. I have come to ask you to do me a favor. He then told about his debate and said, I have come to you for help because I can't think of any else who would be more capable of giving me the facts I want. I'm anxious to win this debate, and I'll deeply appreciate whatever help you can give me. Here is the rest of the story in Mr. Nafale's own words. I had asked this man for precisely 1 minute of his time. It was with the understanding that he consented to see me. After I had stated my case, he motioned me to a chair and talked to me for exactly 1 hour and 47 minutes. He called in another executive who had written a book on chain stores. He wrote the National Chain Store Association and secured me a copy of debate on the subject. He feels that the chain store is rendering a real service to humanity. He is proud of what he is doing for hundreds of communities. His eyes fairly glowed as he talked, and I must confess that he opened my eyes to things I had never even dreamt of. He had changed my whole mental attitude. As I was leaving, he walked with me to the door, put his arm around my shoulder, wished me well in my debate, and asked me to stop in and see him again and let him know how I made out. The last words he said to me were, "Please see me again later in the spring. I should like to place an order with you for fuel." To me, that was almost a miracle. Here he was offering to buy fuel without my even suggesting it. I had made more headway in 2 hours by becoming genuinely interested in him and his problems than I could have made in 10 years trying to get him interested in me and my product. You didn't discover a new truth. For a long time ago, 100 years before Christ was born, a famous old Roman poet, Publius Cyrus, remarked, "We are interested in others when they are interested in us." A show of interest, as with every other principle of human relations, must be sincere. It must pay off not only for the person showing the interest, but for the person receiving the attention. It is not two-way street. Both parties benefit. It must pay off not only for the person showing the interest, but for the person receiving the attention. It is a two-way street. Both parties benefit. Martin, who took our course in Long Island, New York, reported how the special interest a nurse took in him profoundly affected his life. It was Thanksgiving Day, and I was 10 years old, and I was in a welfare ward of a city hospital and was scheduled to undergo major orthopedic surgery the next day. I knew that I could only look forward to months on confinement, convalescing, and pain. My father was dead. My mother and I lived alone in a small apartment, and we were on welfare. My mother was unable to visit me that day. As the sun went on, I became overwhelmed with the feeling of loneliness, despair, and fear. I knew my mother was home alone, worrying about me, not having anyone to be with, not having anyone to eat with, and not even having enough money to afford a Thanksgiving Day dinner. The tears welled up in my eyes, and I stuck my head under the pillow and pulled the covers over it. I cried silently, but oh so bitterly, so much that my body wrecked with pain. A young student nurse heard my sobbing and came over to me. She took the covers off my face and started wiping my tears. She told me how lonely she was having to work that day and not being able to be with her family, and she asked me whether I would have dinner with her. She brought me 2 trays of food: sliced turkey, mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce, and ice cream for dessert. She talked to me and tried to calm my tears, and even though she was scheduled to go off duty at 4 p.m., he stayed on her own time until almost 11 p.m. She played games with me, talked to me, stayed with me until I finally fell asleep. Many Thanksgiving have come and gone since I was 10, but one never passes without me remembering that particular one and my feelings of frustration, fear, loneliness, and the warmth and tenderness of the stranger that has somehow made it all bearable. If you want others to like you, if you want to develop real friendships, if you want to help others at the same time as you help yourself, keep this principle in mind. Become genuinely interested in other people. If you want others to like you, if you want to develop real friendships, if you want to help others at the same time as you help yourself, become genuinely interested in other people. Second principle, a simple way to make a good first impression. At a dinner party in New York, one of the guests, a woman who had inherited money, was eager to make a pleasing impression on everyone. She had squandered a modest fortune on sables, diamonds, and pearls, but she hadn't done anything whatever about her face. It radiated soreness and selfishness. She didn't realize what everyone knows, namely that the expression one wears on one's face is far more important than the clothes one wears on one's back. Charles told me his smile had been worth $1 million, and he was probably understanding the truth. For his personality, his charm, his ability to make people like him were almost wholly responsible for his extraordinary success, and one of the most delightful factors in his personality was the captivating smile. Actions speak louder than words, and a smile says, "I like you, you make me happy, I'm glad to see you." That is why dogs make such a hit. They are so glad to see us that they almost jump out of their skin. So naturally, we are glad to see him. A baby's smile has the same effect. Have you ever been in a doctor's waiting room and looked around at all the glum faces, waiting impatiently to be seen? A veterinarian Misery told of a typical spring day when his waiting room was full of clients waiting to have their pets inoculated. No one was talking to anyone else, and all were probably thinking of a dozen other things they would rather be doing than wasting time. Sitting in that office, he told one of our classes, there were 6 or 7 clients waiting when a young woman came in with a 9-month-old baby and a kitten. As luck who have it, she sat down next to a gentleman who was more than a little distraught about the long wait for service. The next thing he knew, the baby just looked up at him with that great big smile that is so characteristic of babies. What did the gentleman do? Just what you and me would do, of course. He smiled back at the baby. Soon he struck up a conversation with the woman about her baby and his grandchildren, and soon the entire reception room joined in, and the boredom and tension were converted into pleasant and enjoyment experience. And soon the reception room joined in, and the boredom and tension were converted into a pleasant and enjoyable experience. And in sincere grin? No, that doesn't fool anybody. We know it is mechanical and we resent it. I'm talking about a real smile. A heartwarming smile, a smile that comes from within, the kind of smile that will bring a good price in the marketplace. Professor, a psychologist at the University of Michigan, expressed his feelings about a smile. People who smile, he said, tend to manage, teach, and sell more effectively and to raise happier children. There's far more information in a smile than a frown. That's why encouragement is a much more effective teaching device than punishment. The employment manager of a large New York department store told me she would rather hire a sales clerk who hadn't finished grade school if he or she has a pleasant smile than to hire a doctor or philosophy with a somber face. She would rather hire a sales clerk who hadn't finished the school, pleasant smile than to doctor philosophy with a somber face. The effect of a smile is powerful, even when it is unseen. Telephone companies throughout the United States have a program called Phone Power, which is offered to employees who use the telephone for selling their services or products. In this program, they suggest that you smile when talking on the phone. Your smile comes through in your voice. Robert, manager of a computer department for a Ohio company, told how he had successfully found the right applicant for a hard-to-fill position. I was desperately trying to recruit a PhD in computer science for my department. I finally located a young man with ideal qualifications who was about to be graduated from Purdue University. After several phone conversations, I learned that he had several offers from other companies, many of them larger and better known than mine, and I was delighted that he has accepted my offer. After he started on the job, I asked him why he had chosen us over the others. He paused for a moment and then he said, "I think it was because managers in the other company spoke on the phone in a cold, business-like manner, which made me feel like just another business transactions. But your voice sounded as if you were glad to hear from me, that you were wanted to be part of your organization. You can be assured I'm still answering my phone with a smile." I think it was because managers in the other companies spoke on the phone in a cold, business-like manner, which made me feel like just another business transaction. Your voice sounded as if you were glad to hear from me and you were wanted me from part of your organization. The chairman of the board of directors of one of the largest rubber companies in the United States told me that, according to his observations, people rarely succeeded at any unless they have fun doing it. This industrial leader doesn't put much faith in the old adage that hard work alone is the magic key that will unlock the door to our desires. I have known people, he said, who succeeded because they had a rip-roaring good time conducting their business. Later, I saw those people change as the fun became work. The business had grown dull. They lost all joy in it, and they failed. You must have a good time meeting people if you expect them to have a good time meeting with you. You must have a good time meeting people if you expect people to have a good time meeting you. I have asked thousands of business people to smile at anyone every hour of the day for a week and then come to class and talk about the results. How did it work? Let's see. Here is a letter from William, a New York stockbroker. His case isn't isolated. In fact, it is typical of hundreds of cases. I had been married for over 18 years, wrote William, and in all that time I seldom smiled at my wife or spoke 24 words to her from the time I got up until I was ready to leave for business. I was only of the worst grocious who ever walked down Broadway. When you asked me to make a talk about my experience with smiles, I thought I would try it for a week. So the next morning, while combing my hair, I looked at my mug in the mirror and said to myself, Bill, you're going to wipe the scowl off that sour puss of yours today. You are going to smile, and you are going to begin right now. As I sat down to breakfast, I greeted my wife with a "Good morning, my dear," and smiled as I said it. You warned me that she might be surprised. Well, you underestimated her reaction. She was bewildered, and she was shocked. I told her that in the future she could expect this as a regular occurrence, and I kept it up every morning. This changed attitude of mine brought more happiness into our home in 2 months since I started than there was during the last year. As I leave for my office, I greet the elevator operator in the apartment house with a good morning and a smile. I greet the doorman with a smile. I smile at the cashier in the subway booth when I ask for change. As I stand on the floor of the stock exchange, I smiled at people who until recently never saw me smile. I soon found that everybody was smiling back at me. I treat those who come to me with compliments or complaints or grievances in a cheerful manner. I smile as I listen to them, and I find that adjustments are accomplished much easier. I find that smiles are bringing me dollars, many dollars, every day. I share my office with another broker. One of his clerks is a likable young chap, and I was so elated about the results I was getting that I told him recently about my new philosophy of human relations. He then confessed that when I first came to share my office with his firm, he thought me a terrible grouch, and only recently changed his mind. He said I was really human when I smiled. I was also eliminated criticism from my system. I soon found that everybody was smiling back at me. I treat those people and find that smiles are bringing me dollars, many dollars every day. I share my office with another broker. He said I was really human when I smiled. I have also eliminated criticism from my system. I give appreciation and praise now instead of condemnation. I have stopped talking about what I want. I'm now trying to see the other person's viewpoint, and these things have literally revolutionized my life. And I'm a totally different man, a happier man, a richer in friendship and happiness, the only things that matter much after all. You don't feel like smiling? Then what? 2 things. First, force yourself to smile. If you are alone, force yourself to whistle or hum a tune or sing. Act as if you were already happy, and that will tend to make you happy. Here is the way of psychologist and philosopher William James put in. Action seems to follow feeling, but really action and feelings go together. And by regulating the action, which is under the more direct control of the will, we can indirectly regulate the feeling, which is not. Thus, this sovereign, voluntary path to the cheerfulness. Actions seem to follow, but really, action and feelings go together. And by regulating the action, which is under the more direct control of the will, we can indirectly regulate the feeling, which is not. Be lost is to sit up cheerfully and to act and speak as if cheerfulness were already there. Everybody in the world is seeking happiness, and there is one sure way to find it. That is by controlling your thoughts. Happiness doesn't depend on outward conditions. It depends on our inner conditions. Everybody in the world is seeking happiness, and there is one way to find it. That is by controlling your thoughts. Happiness doesn't depend on outward conditions. It depends on our inner conditions. It isn't what you have or who you are or where you are or what you're doing that makes you happy or unhappy. It is what you think about it. For example, two people may be in the same place doing the same thing. Both may have about an equal amount of money and prestige, and yet one may be miserable and one may be happy. Why? Because of a different mental attitude. And I have seen just as many happy faces among the poor peasants toiling with their primitive tools in the devastating heat of the tropics as I have seen in the air-conditioned offices in New York, Chicago, or Los Angeles. It isn't who you have or who you are or where you are or what you're doing or makes you happy or unhappy. It is what you think about it. There is nothing either good or bad, said Shakespeare, but thinking makes it so. Abe Lincoln once remarked that most folks are about as happy as they made up their minds to be. He was right. I saw a vivid illustration of that truth as I was walking up the stairs of the Long Island Railroad station in New York. Directly in front of me, 30 or 40 crippled boys on canes and crutches were struggling up the stairs. One boy had to be carried up. I was astonished at their laughter and gaiety, and I spoke about it to one of the men in charge of the boys. "Oh yes," he said, "when a boy realizes that he is going to be a cripple for life, he is shocked at first, but after he gets over the shock, he usually resigns himself to his fate and then becomes as happy as normal boys." I felt like taking my hat off to those boys. They taught me a lesson I hope I shall never forget. Working all by oneself in a closed-off room in an office not only is lonely, but it denies one the opportunity of making friends with other employees in the company. Senora Maria of Mexico had such a job. She envied the shared comradeship of other people in the company as she heard their chatter and laughter. As she passed them in the hall during the first weeks of her employment, she shyly looked the other way. After a few weeks, she said to herself, "Maria, you can't expect those women to come to you. You have to go out and meet them." The next time she walked to the water cooler, she put on her brightest smile and said, "Hi, how are you today?" to each of the people she met. The effect was immediate. Smiles and hellos were returned. The hallway seemed brighter, the job friendlier. Acquaintanceships developed, and some ripened into friendships. Her job and her life became more pleasant and interesting. Peruse this bit of sage advice from the essayist and publisher Albert Hubbard. But remember, perusing it won't do you any good unless you apply it. Whenever you go out of doors, draw the chin in, carry the crown of the hat high, and fill the lungs to the utmost. Drink in the sunshine, greet your friends with a smile, and put soul into every hand clasp. Do not fear being misunderstood, and do not waste a minute thinking about your enemies. Try to fix firmly in your mind what you would like to do, and then without veering off direction, you will move straight to the goal. Keep your mind on the great and splendid things you would like to do, and then, as the days go gliding away, you will find yourself unconsciously seizing upon opportunities that are required for fulfillment of your desire. Just as the coral in speck takes from the running tide the element it needs. Picture in your mind the able, earnest, useful person you desire to be, and the thought you hold is hourly transforming you into the particular individual. Thought is supreme. Preserve and right mental attitude. The attitude of courage, frankness, and good cheer. To think rightly is to relate. All things come through desire, and every sincere prayer is answered. We become like that on which our hearts are fixed. Carry our chin and crown our head high. We are gods in the chrysalis. The ancient Chinese were a wise lot, wise in the ways of the world, and they had a proverb that you and I ought to cut out and paste inside our hats. It goes like this: a man without a smiling face must not open his shop. Your smile is a messenger of your goodwill. Your smile brightens the lives of all who see it. To someone who has seen a dozen people frown, scowl, or turn their faces away, your smile is like the sun breaking through the clouds, especially when that someone is under pressure from his bosses, his customers, his teachers, or parents or children. A smile can help them realize that all is not hopeless, that there is joy in the world. There is joy in the world. Some years ago, a department store in New York City, in recognition of the pressure its sales clerks were under during the Christmas rushes, with the following homely philosophy: the value of a smile at Christmas. It costs nothing but creates much. It enriches those who receive without impoverishing those who give. It happens in a flash, and the memory of it sometimes lasts forever. None are so rich they can get along without it, and none so poor but are richer for its benefits. It creates happiness in the home, fosters goodwill in a business, and is the countersign of friends. It is rest of the weary, daylight to the discouraged, sunshine to the sad, and nature's best antidote for trouble. Yet it cannot be bought, bagged, borrowed, or stolen, for it is something that is no earthly good to know anybody till it is given away. And if in the last-minute rush of Christmas buying some of our salespeople should be 100 tired to give you a smile, may we ask you to leave one of yours, for nobody needs a smile so much as those who have none left to give. Principle 2 is to smile.